My son looked me dead in the eye and said, "Don't come to the Christmas party. You'll embarrass me in front of the executives." The room went silent. I buttoned my coat, walked out into the freezing night, and that was the moment everything in his perfect world began to crack. Before we dive into how it came to this, if you believe karma always finds its way, hit subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Don't come to the Christmas party. You'll embarrass me in front of the executives. Jason didn't even lift his eyes from the papers on his desk when he said it. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, the kind of tone a man uses when he's already convinced himself you don't matter. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was dismissal. I stood in the doorway of his office, the same office I once helped him secure, the air heavy with cologne and the faint hum of expensive machinery. Everything around him spoke of money, status, and control. And yet, the only thing I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat, steady, then broken, then steady again. For a split second, I thought he might take it back. That maybe he'd smile, wave me in, say it was a joke gone too far. But then he smirked, not at me, not with me, but through me, like I was a stain on the carpet, something that didn't belong in the polished world he had built. The words themselves weren't long, but they carried the weight of decades. They weren't just about a party. They were about rewriting history, about cutting me out of the story he wanted to tell, the image he wanted to sell. A father turned into an obstacle, a name turned into an inconvenience. The silence stretched, thick as wet cement. Behind him, the city skyline glowed through the window, bright towers rising like monuments. Symbols of power Jason thought he had conquered on his own. Symbols I knew were built on sacrifices he had already forgotten. I didn't argue. I didn't remind him of the nights I stayed awake crunching numbers so his future could stay intact. I didn't list the debts I carried for his comfort. What would be the point? To beg for scraps of respect from my own blood, number that was beneath even me. So I buttoned my old coat, the same one he mocked for being out of fashion, and walked out. Each step echoed against the marble floor, heavy, deliberate, final. The secretary at the front desk glanced up, her eyes soft with pity, as if she knew she'd just witnessed something unholy, a son discarding his father like outdated furniture. In that hallway, with its cold lights and sterile silence, I felt something inside me close, a door that had stayed open far too long. He thought he was just keeping me from a party. But what Jason didn't know, what he could never imagine, was that he had just sent me walking toward the truth I had avoided for years. And when the truth comes knocking, it doesn't leave quietly. At home that evening, the house felt colder than the winter air outside. Linda tried to soften the blow, her voice trembling as she set down a plate of food I could barely taste. "He's under pressure," she said, as if stress excused cruelty. She looked at me like I was supposed to understand, to forgive, but what she didn't see was that I'd been forgiving Jason my entire life, handing him excuses like lifelines he never earned. I sat in silence, listening to the clink of silverware against china, the hollow rhythm of a family that wasn't a family anymore. Across from me, Linda's eyes darted nervously, like she feared my anger would shatter the fragile illusion she was trying to keep alive. But I wasn't angry. Anger had burned out years ago, replaced by something colder, something like grief. Chloe's voice echoed in my memory, sharper than Linda's whispers. I remembered overhearing her once, laughing to her friends that I was outdated, a relic Jason had been forced to carry. She was the gasoline on a fire already smoldering, and Jason, weak in his pride, let her words shape him. In my own living room, surrounded by the furniture I had paid for, the roof I had secured, I suddenly felt like a guest. Jason's absence was louder than his presence, and Linda's excuses filled the void where a son's respect should have been. I realized then that the divide wasn't just at his office, it had seeped into the walls of my own home. A silent war was being waged, and I was on the losing side before I even knew the battle had begun. It started small, a skipped introduction here, a quiet omission there. Jason would be in a meeting with colleagues, and when someone asked about his background, he'd smile and say, "Let's just say I had to climb up from nothing." Nothing. That word rolled off his tongue so easily. I wondered if he even remembered the checks with my signature that carried him through every step of that climb. At networking events, I was invisible. When we happened to be in the same room, he would nod at me like I was some distant family acquaintance, not the man who once stayed up all night editing his first resume. One night, I attended a gala hosted by one of the company's senior partners. I hadn't been invited. Linda had pulled strings for us to be there. As Jason moved across the room like a prince among peasants, I overheard him speaking to a pair of investors. He was talking about legacy, about how he built everything from scratch, how he earned every inch. He even joked, and they all laughed, that his father was a quiet man who never really understood the business world. That was me. I stood 10 feet away, wineglass in hand, each syllable slapping harder than the last. It was no longer just rejection. It was erasure. And in public, it was mockery. I was becoming the ghost he denied, the inconvenience he repackaged as fiction. He didn't just cut me out of his life, he was rewriting the script to make sure I'd never existed in it to begin with. It came in layers like rust on metal. Small enough to ignore at first, but steady, corrosive, fatal. Jason had begun correcting me in front of others. Subtle at first, a tight smile, a polite interjection. Actually, Dad, that's not quite how it works anymore. Then it got bolder. Old methods don't apply here. He doesn't really get the pace of modern business. Every comment another scrape against my dignity. I wasn't just being phased out, I was being rebranded as irrelevant. At one lunch with mutual friends, I made a passing joke about an old spreadsheet trick I used to teach junior staff. Jason interrupted, loud enough for the entire table. Yeah, back when things were still on paper. Everyone laughed, even Linda, though hers was nervous and short. I stared at my soup bowl and nodded, pretending not to bleed. The worst came during a partner dinner, hosted at a country club, where I had once been a member. Jason had been invited as a guest of honor. I hadn't been invited at all. A friend texted me a photo from across the room, Jason standing tall, delivering a toast with Chloe by his side, speaking about his climb, his challenges, his triumphs. Not a single word about who gave him his first foot on the ladder. I wasn't just left out, I was deleted. And that night, as I sat alone in my living room, the soft ticking of the clock, the only sound around me, I realized something terrible. Jason wasn't proud of his success. He was ashamed of its foundation, me. The night of the Christmas party, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Linda had gone to bed early, feigning a headache. I knew the truth. She didn't want to face the shame either of us felt. I sat alone in the kitchen, the glow from the stovetop light casting long shadows across the floor. I didn't drink, didn't eat. Just listened to the faint static of the radio and imagined the clinking of glasses somewhere downtown. Somewhere Jason stood, smiling, thriving, surrounded by people who thought they knew who he was. My phone buzzed. A message from an old colleague. Your son's speech was interesting. I stared at the screen. Then another came in. This time, a video. Jason stood beneath the chandelier of the banquet hall, dressed sharp, microphone in hand. He raised his glass and said, "Some of us came from nothing. No family legacies. No shortcuts. Just hard work." Applause. Then he laughed, the kind of laugh that punches downward. My father, well, he's better off watching from home. He wouldn't fit in here anyway. More laughter. Big, theatrical. The room loved it. I watched in stillness. I didn't flinch, didn't cry. I simply rewound the video and played it again, and again, until I didn't feel humiliated anymore. Until something colder, sharper settled in my chest. That was the moment I stopped being hurt and started preparing. Jason didn't ask. He expected. The day he told me he wanted to pursue his MBA, he spoke like a man announcing a promotion. He didn't have the money. Of course, student loans weren't an option with his credit, and scholarships were out of reach. But none of that mattered. Because he had me. I didn't hesitate. I signed the checks, drained the account, restructured the mortgage. I told Linda, it's worth it. This degree will change his life. And I believed it. God help me. I believed it. Every Monday morning, I'd drive him to campus, wait in the parking lot while he attended lectures. He never asked me to. He also never asked if I minded. I'd sit with a thermos of coffee and a newspaper, pretending the engine hum wasn't the sound of my own time being eaten alive. I still remember the day he graduated. He didn't ask if I wanted to attend the ceremony. Chloe took all the pictures. I saw them on Facebook, my son in a cap and gown, grinning wide, the caption reading, "Made it here on my own." No tag, no mention, no nod to the man who paid every cent. Just a clean, beautiful lie polished for strangers. But back then, I told myself, it's okay, let him shine. I didn't know I'd be watching him build his kingdom on top of the grave where I buried my pride. The house was too big for them. Jason and Chloe didn't need 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, a wraparound porch, and imported Italian tile. But Jason said, It's the kind of house executives are expected to live in. They'd found it in a gated community just outside the city. Gleaming white exterior, open concept everything. A place that screamed arrival, not comfort. They didn't qualify for the mortgage. I knew it the moment he called. His voice was too casual, too warm. "Hey, Dad, got a quick favor." I already knew what was coming. He needed a cosigner, someone with a strong credit score, someone the bank would trust, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. Linda urged me to say yes. She always did. "It's just paperwork," she whispered. "He'll handle the payments. He's not a kid anymore." So I went. Saturday in the banker's office across from Jason, watching him smile and nod while the loan officer explained the terms. She looked at me and said, "If anything happens, you'll be liable." I signed anyway. The housewarming party came and went. I stood near the back, holding a glass of lemonade while Jason gave tours. "We made it happen," he told people. "Took a lot of hustle. No mention of my name, no hint of the risk sitting on my shoulders." That night, as I drove home, I passed the bank's billboard glowing in the dark. "Build your dream, backed by someone who believes." I laughed out loud. Bitter, quiet, alone. It was a 1998 Lincoln Town car, dark green, well kept and paid off in full. I'd bought it the year after I got promoted to chief financial officer. That car wasn't just a vehicle. It was my quiet reward, my proof that years of honest work meant something. Jason hated it. He called it a boat. Said it made me look like someone who'd given up. Every time he got in, he complained. The ride was too slow, the radio too old, the smell too dad. This prepped it. But when his third business venture crumbled, a boutique consulting firm that never had clients, just branding, he came knocking. He was months behind on rent for their second apartment. His credit cards were maxed. Chloe was threatening to move in with her sister. I didn't ask what happened. He didn't offer to explain. I just walked into the garage the next morning, stared at the Lincoln, and quietly drove it to a resale lot 2 towns over. Got less than what it was worth, but I didn't flinch. I took the check and wired it straight into his account. He never said thank you. Weeks later, I saw him post a photo online, him and Chloe, drinking champagne, captioned, "Bounce back season." I stared at the screen for a long time. He never asked where the money came from, and maybe that was the worst part. He didn't care. My car was gone. But the bigger loss was something I couldn't park in any garage. The belief that he might ever see me as anything more than disposable. I had a plan. Retire at 60. Spend mornings reading the paper with Linda on the porch. Maybe travel nothing extravagant, just the open road and time to waste. After a lifetime of balance sheets and bottom lines, I had finally charted a map that didn't require me to answer to anyone. But then Jason came with another idea. He'd been offered a chance to buy into a startup division, the next big thing, he said. A ground floor opportunity. All he needed was capital. $350,000 to be exact. A bridge loan, he called it. I told him I didn't have that kind of cash lying around. He said, "You have your retirement fund." He said it casually, like he was suggesting I dip into a cookie jar. Linda, as always, defended him. "It's an investment. He's your son. Wouldn't it be worth it to see him succeed?" I tried to push back, tried to say no, but somehow I was the villain for hesitating, the man who didn't believe in his own blood. So I did what I had always done. I gave in. Liquidated a portion of my IRA, paid penalties I couldn't afford. I wired the money in full. Jason called me that night. "Thanks, Dad. You won't regret this." That was the last time he said those words. 2 years later, I was still working contract jobs to fill the gap. The startup folded. Jason moved on. I stayed behind, with less than I started, and not even a photograph to show for it. It wasn't the big moments that wore me down. It was the tiny ones. The phone calls that went unanswered, the texts marked read but never replied, the way Jason's voice flattened when I spoke, like I was background noise breaking through a better conversation. I remember once stopping by his office to drop off some legal papers he needed signed. Chloe opened the door, eyebrows raised. "Did you call ahead?" she asked. I hadn't. I thought I didn't need to. She told me Jason was in a meeting and closed the door. He never followed up, never asked what I came by for. At family dinners, Jason talked only to Chloe or to his phone. When I chimed in, he'd nod vaguely or cut me off with a change of subject. It wasn't confrontation that would have required acknowledging me. This was something colder, erasure by silence. I once offered a story from my working days, something light, something I thought he might find useful. Jason sighed, took a sip of his wine, and said, "Times have changed, Dad. That stuff doesn't apply anymore." Linda shot me a look. The one that meant, don't push it, don't make it worse. So I didn't. I sat in my own home and watched my own son pretend I wasn't there. And the worst part? I let him. Because deep down, I still clung to the hope that he'd come around. That if I stayed quiet long enough, he might remember I was the man who never said no to him. But silence doesn't earn love. It just teaches them how to ignore you better. Linda always saw the best in him. When Jason skipped visits, she said he was busy. When he raised his voice, she said he was just stressed. When he called me old-fashioned at Thanksgiving, she laughed it off and changed the subject. Every insult, every cold shoulder, she softened the edges, wrapped them in warm excuses, and handed them to me like comfort. "Don't be too hard on him," she'd whisper. "He's under a lot of pressure." But when does pressure become character? When does a pattern stop being circumstantial and start becoming who they are? One evening, after Jason left early from dinner without saying goodbye, I asked Linda, "Why do you always defend him?" She didn't answer right away. She just stared down at the dishes in the sink. Finally, she said, "Because if I stop, I'm afraid of what I'll see." That hit harder than any silence Jason ever gave me, because I realized she wasn't just shielding him from consequence. She was shielding herself from the reality that we had raised a son who only knew how to take, and in doing so, she left me standing alone, holding the wreckage of a family she refused to admit was broken. Sometimes, the deepest betrayal doesn't come from who hurts you. It comes from who lets them do it. It crept in one night like a slow fog, not a crash, not a revelation, just clarity. I was in the garage, organizing old boxes, financial records, home repair receipts, Jason's first report cards. I held in my hands the history of a life built brick by brick, check by check, favor by favor. And suddenly, I saw it not as a legacy, but as a ledger. Jason didn't love me. He leveraged me. He learned early that I would say yes. Yes to tuition. Yes to housing. Yes to saving him from failure. He didn't remember the sacrifices because he never saw them. To him, they were air, invisible, automatic, expected. And I let him, because I kept thinking that one more loan, one more bailout, one more silence would earn me what I truly wanted. To be seen, not as a wallet, not as an obligation, but as a man, a father, someone worth respect. But respect doesn't grow from silence. It grows from boundaries. And I had never drawn a single line, standing there with dust on my hands and papers from 20 years ago. I whispered to no one, "You raised him, Edward. You built him. And now he's building a world without you in it." It wasn't rage that followed. It was resolve. No more forgiving, no more waiting, no more hoping he'd wake up one day and remember who helped him climb. If he didn't want to carry my name with pride, then I'd make sure he carried the weight of what he owed. Old habits die hard. Even in retirement, I couldn't shake the instinct cataloging, labeling, scanning receipts, saving every version of every document. Linda used to tease me for it, called me a human filing cabinet, but I kept at it, not for anyone else, just because it was how I was wired. I never thought it would matter again, until I stumbled on the backup drive. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. Rain tapped the windows, and Linda was upstairs reading. I was looking for a warranty on the dishwasher when I opened the wrong drawer and pulled out an old portable hard drive, the kind I hadn't touched since before Jason's promotion. Out of habit, I plugged it into my laptop. Folders bloomed across the screen, archived emails, financial summaries, copies of contracts I had once reviewed for Jason when he was too busy to read the fine print. I had saved them without thinking, old spreadsheets, budgets I helped him draft, PDF scans from his early business ventures. I clicked through one, then another. At first, it was nostalgia, then familiarity, then discomfort. And then it hit me line items that didn't add up, vendor names that sounded made up, expenditures logged against departments that didn't exist. A different kind of instinct kicked in, the one I thought I'd retired along with my CFO title. The numbers were talking, and they were telling me something Jason had prayed I'd never see. The first red flag was almost invisible, a single vendor name buried deep in an old expense report, Aegis Consulting. I didn't recognize it. It appeared as a line item under outsourced research services on a quarterly operations budget Jason had once asked me to review years ago. At the time, I hadn't questioned it. He said it was part of a rebranding strategy. I was proud he trusted me with the paperwork, but now, something felt off. I opened a search tab. No website, no address. Just a vague LLC registration in Delaware tied to a post office box. I dug deeper, traced it through filings, digital breadcrumbs, and a few backdoor registry tools I still knew how to use. What I found wasn't shocking, it was insulting. The business was fake. On paper, Aegis Consulting had billed Jason's division over $90,000 over 3 fiscal quarters. But there were no deliverables, no reports, no audit trails. The funds were approved by Jason, cleared by Jason, paid out under a departmental code that didn't exist when I was CFO. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the monitor. The cursor blinked like a ticking clock. Either Jason was being used, or Jason was doing the using. And the deeper I looked, the less I liked the answer that kept forming. This wasn't just creative accounting. This was deliberate, and it was just the beginning. The deeper I dug, the more the pattern began to take shape. Not chaos, but choreography. Jason hadn't just skimmed money. He'd engineered a system built on ghost paper and shell deals, contracts between his department and entities that didn't exist beyond a name, a signature, and a checking account. One company stood out, Veriton Group. Sounded legitimate. Their logo looked corporate enough. But once again, no footprint, no team, no clients. Only a mailbox rental in Nevada, and a registered agent with 37 other businesses under his name. I found 6 contracts signed under Jason's authority, all for consulting, branding, or logistics assessments. Services that left no trace, no reports, no invoices. Just payment confirmation and Jason's digital signature authorizing release. The worst part? One of those payment accounts was tied to a secondary trust. And that trust? Under Chloe's maiden name. The documents didn't scream. They whispered. Soft enough that only someone who had once lived inside the system could hear what they were saying. Fraud, covered with polish, masked by arrogance. I stared at the page. I wasn't confused. I wasn't surprised. I was disappointed, deeply. Because while the public saw Jason as a polished director with sharp suits and cleaner numbers, I now saw him for what he really was. A man laundering ambition through his last name. And I had been the front door. The numbers told the story, and this chapter was louder than the rest. Jason had stopped pretending. I combed through expense reports and reimbursement forms Jason had submitted through the company's internal system. He had labeled them as client hospitality or team-building retreats. At a glance, they looked clean, professional, but I knew how to read the subtext. An executive suite in Miami booked during a weekend with no conferences. A $2,400 dinner at a private rooftop steakhouse, no attendees listed. A series of Uber rides, all at 2 a.m., in cities where his team had no footprint. One invoice claimed a luxury yacht rental labeled Q2 Celebration Event. I ran the dock records. It was a honeymoon yacht. I checked the date. It aligned with his wedding anniversary. Jason was funneling company money into his personal life, gifts, trips, indulgences. And each time he did it, he buried it under vague codes and bloated budgets. It wasn't sloppiness. It was entitlement. He believed he was untouchable, that he could take and no one would dig deep enough to question. But he forgot something critical. He taught me the system. I didn't build the rules to be broken. And now I had everything I needed to hold him accountable, line by line, charge by charge, lie by polished lie. The documents were powerful. But the video? That was the dagger. It came from an unexpected place forwarded by a former colleague, someone who had once looked up to Jason until the mask slipped. The message was short. Figured you should see this. The file opened to a shaky handheld shot. A party, somewhere private, dimly lit. Jason was center frame, half drunk and fully arrogant. He clutched a glass of bourbon, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, tie loosened like a flag of victory. He was laughing. Loud, loose, careless. And you know what the best part is? He said, slurring just slightly. My old man, he's clueless. Still thinks I need his approval. Still thinks he matters. Laughter off screen. Jason raised his glass. I could burn the whole company to the ground and he'd just sit there and smile. He won't stop me. He never has. More laughter. The video cut out there, mercifully. I sat there frozen, not with anger but with confirmation. Everything I feared, everything I doubted, spoken out loud. No metaphor. No subtlety. Just a son broadcasting to his peers that I was weak, irrelevant, invisible. But I wasn't, not anymore. He may have underestimated me in front of his friends, but I had something none of them did. Evidence. Dated, documented, undeniable. And when it came time to act, I wouldn't need to raise my voice. The truth would do all the speaking for me. I wasn't just chasing ghosts anymore. I had names, dates, transactions, and now a confession. It was time to test the strength of what I had. I made one call. Alan Berger, corporate attorney, old friend, and the only man I trusted with both my past and my plan. We met in the back of a quiet coffee shop. No laptops, no phones on the table. I slid over a flash drive and a printed binder, everything. The contracts, the expense records, the shell companies, and the video. He didn't speak for 10 minutes. Just read. Flipped pages, scanned receipts. Then he looked up and said, "This is a slam dunk." I didn't smile. He leaned in, voice low. "If we go public with this, Jason's career is over. But if you're willing to take it to the board with this level of documentation, he won't just lose his title. He'll face a formal audit, potential criminal charges, and a full internal review. It'll hit everyone tied to him, Chloe included." I nodded. Alan asked, "Are you ready for that kind of fallout?" I folded my hands. I've lived in his shadow long enough. Let them see who he really is. He tapped the binder. "We'll go through legal first. Let it pass compliance. Then we time the release." I asked. "When?" He smirked. "You tell me. You know his calendar better than anyone." And I did. There was a date circled in my mind. A night when all eyes would be on him. The Christmas party was 2 weeks away. I didn't sleep much those last few nights. Not because I was anxious, but because my mind was too clear. There was no more fog, no more confusion. Just facts, documents, time-stamped truth. The kind of evidence that didn't ask for permission to be believed. I spent 3 days organizing everything into folders. One digital, one physical. Alan helped draft the legal notices and compliance briefings. The chain of custody was airtight. There was no room for denial. Linda noticed something had shifted. She asked, softly, "What are you planning to do?" I said nothing, just handed her a copy of the video. She watched it alone in the kitchen. Didn't cry, didn't speak, just closed the laptop and nodded. That was the first time in years we understood each other without saying a word. On the 4th day, I sat at the old desk in the den, staring at the flash drive in my hand. It weighed nothing, but it held everything. Every insult, every silent betrayal, every cent pulled from my future to build his illusion. I used to tell myself revenge wasn't the answer. That blood was thicker than pride. But this wasn't revenge. This was restitution. I put the flash drive in an envelope, addressed it to the board chair, and stamped it with the company's motto printed on the corner. Integrity, accountability, vision, 12. They were about to find out if their golden boy believed in any of those. And Jason? He was about to learn the one equation he never solved. A father's silence doesn't mean he isn't watching. The first move had to be silent. Loud revenge is sloppy. But surgical cuts? They leave no room for escape. I started with the banks. Years ago, Jason asked me to be a silent guarantor on several corporate and personal accounts lines of credit he couldn't secure on his own. He said it was temporary, said I was just a name on paper. He never bothered to remove me. So I did it myself. I revoked all personal guarantees tied to my name, froze access to a dormant trust account he'd forgotten was in my control, transferred custodial authority on the last joint asset I held, an emergency fund he didn't know I still monitored. Next, I called the family accountant, told him to prepare amended records, separate filings. No more overlap, no more favors. Every document he needed, I handed over in one organized envelope, labeled and time-stamped. Then I pulled the insurance files. Years ago, I'd taken out a keyman policy to protect Jason's early ventures. It was still active, still draining my premiums. Not anymore. Termination letters, digital locks, asset barriers. By the time the first Monday rolled in, Jason's name had been quietly erased from every financial shadow I used to protect him. It didn't bankrupt him, but it made him bleed. The first withdrawal wasn't money. It was control. Exposure doesn't always begin with a spotlight. Sometimes, it starts with a whisper, one delivered into the right inbox at exactly the right time. At 7:46 a.m. on a Wednesday, every member of the company's audit committee received an anonymous email. No greeting, no signature, just an attachment labeled, preliminary findings, internal financial irregularities. Inside was a 78-page dossier, vendor records, payment histories, screenshots of altered documents, IP logs tracing Jason's approvals, an appendix listing shell entities, one of which matched Chloe's maiden name. At the end, a direct link to the video. Within hours, the internal Slack channels buzzed with code words. Escalate. Legal loop-in. Requesting board review. Jason didn't know yet, but his walls were already starting to creak. I knew their system. I built their compliance process. The moment someone triggered the conflict of interest flag, the entire machine would lock on and start to spin. Policies he once ignored were about to become the net that trapped him. By noon, Alan received a message from an insider. Is your client ready to speak off the record? We weren't going to speak. We were going to document. No threats, no demands, just truth printed, categorized, and delivered without emotion. Because the thing Jason never understood was that I didn't need to destroy him. All I had to do was let the truth breathe. The financial side was crumbling, but Jason could have survived numbers. What he couldn't survive was silence from the people who used to applaud him. I didn't send the dossier to the press. I didn't leak it to tabloids. I didn't need to. All I did was blind copy one email, the same file I'd sent to the board, and quietly forward it to 4 people. His mentor at the firm, his wife's business partner, his old roommate turned investor, and the executive assistant who ran half the company without the title. The people who mattered. They were the kind who shared stories over wine and confidential whispers. The kind who knew which secrets to keep and which ones to echo, just loud enough for the room to hear. Within 48 hours, the air around Jason began to shift. The enthusiastic greetings turned lukewarm. Texts went unanswered. Lunches were postponed, then canceled. He started calling people more than once. That's when it began to show the cracks in his voice, the edge in his tone. His jokes no longer landed. His charm started to wear like an overused cologne. Too strong, too obvious. Because once doubt enters the circle, reputation is no longer a shield, it becomes a spotlight. Jason built a brand, not a legacy. And brands don't survive scandal. They get rebranded, replaced, or deleted. And now, even his echo chamber had gone quiet. Jason always believed power came from position. But real power, it comes from loyalty, the quiet kind that doesn't wear a suit or sit at the head of a table. And that kind had started to walk away. His assistant of 6 years suddenly went on leave. The head of operations, who once vouched for him in front of the board, submitted a request for department rotation. Chloe's business partner withdrew from their joint interior design project. Even the junior analyst who worshipped Jason like a brother began avoiding eye contact in the break room. No dramatic exits, no confrontations. Just absence. The kind of silence that speaks volumes in corporate hallways. The kind that tells you the tide is shifting and no one wants to be standing next to the man marked red in the reports. Jason felt it. He tried to overcorrect. Sent flowers, scheduled one-on-ones, even hosted a sudden gratitude lunch. But gratitude doesn't erase fear, and no one wanted to be caught eating with a scandal. Chloe, once loud and glittering, grew quiet at events. Her Instagram went dark. The hashtag couple had become invisible. And Linda? She said nothing, just set 2 plates for dinner again, and stopped asking if Jason was coming by. It was strange, watching a man so loud disappear. But that's how isolation works. You don't hear the walls fall. You just look up one day and realize. You're the only one left in the room, Linda found out before Jason did. The file I'd sent to the board had made its way back to her quietly, anonymously, through someone who still respected her, if not her son. She read it twice. Then again, I watched her hands tremble as she closed the folder. She didn't ask if it was true. She didn't need to. That night, she stood in the doorway of our bedroom and said, "What are you going to do?" I looked at her, really looked at her. My wife of 40 years, the woman who had protected Jason with blind love and hopeful excuses, the mother who saw what she wanted to see. I told her the truth. Nothing he didn't do to himself. She sat beside me on the bed. For a long time we didn't speak. Then she whispered, "He's still our son." I nodded, "And I'm still his father. But that doesn't mean I owe him silence." The next morning, Jason called the house. Linda answered. I could hear his voice sharp, panicked, accusing. She said nothing at first, just listened. Then she said the one sentence I never expected to hear from her. "Your father warned you." The call ended shortly after. She didn't cry. That Sunday, she cooked dinner for two, set the table, lit a candle. She didn't mention Jason again. Sometimes a rift isn't loud. It doesn't come with slammed doors or shouted regrets. Sometimes it's just the quiet acceptance that something broke. And this time, it won't be fixed. December 22nd, the company Christmas party. Black tie, rooftop venue, catered by the city's finest. Jason had reserved a private section just for board members and executive prospects. His name was printed in gold on the program, Vice President of Strategic Growth, keynote address. He rehearsed the speech all week. He'd timed the applause breaks. Meanwhile, Alan and I finalized the delivery. At 7:18 p.m., as the string quartet played their second set, every member of the executive board received an email. Subject: Financial Misconduct Package, urgent. Attached was a full audit legal summary and evidence binder. Inside, vendor fraud, asset abuse, personal spending trails, and the now infamous video, Jason, drunk, bragging, declaring himself untouchable. Phones buzzed in sequence. Heads turned. Whispers bloomed like wildfire. Jason stood on stage, smiling, raising his glass. A spotlight washed him in gold. He didn't know. Not yet. Then his mentor stood up and left the room. Then his assistant. Then the regional CFO, face pale, phone in hand. Jason's smile faltered. He looked out over a crowd that wasn't laughing anymore. His voice cracked. "We have so much to celebrate tonight." He never finished the sentence. Because in that moment, Jason Blake, the man who thought reputation was bulletproof, finally heard what a reckoning sounds like. It's not a bang, it's silence, followed by the sound of doors closing. I arrived 15 minutes late. No coat check, no smile, just a man in an old wool overcoat, walking through polished marble like it meant nothing. Alan followed 2 steps behind, briefcase in hand, the weight of a career's worth of proof sealed inside. The lobby was near empty now. The buzz had drained from the building. What remained were whispers and eyes that darted away too quickly. The double doors to the ballroom creaked open. Jason stood near the bar, pale and rigid, tie loosened, glass trembling in his hand. He turned slowly when he saw me, like he wasn't sure I was real. He opened his mouth, closed it. I stepped forward. No shouting, no accusations. I simply looked at him not as a father, not as a man betrayed, but as the last witness to the version of himself he just destroyed. He whispered, "Why?" Alan handed me the envelope. I passed it to Jason without ceremony. Inside was the final package. Copies of every document, time-stamped email threads, signed affidavits. Legally irrefutable, morally undeniable. He looked down at it, hands shaking. Then I said, clear and cold, "This isn't revenge, Jason. This is an audit." His face crumbled, not with guilt, but with disbelief. Because he'd always assumed I wouldn't dare. He was wrong. I turned, walked out, and this time, no one tried to stop me. I didn't look back, but I heard it. Not his voice that was gone, but the sound of unraveling, the hush of people shifting away, the heavy footsteps of board members exiting without goodbyes, the clink of an untouched glass being set down. By the time I reached the sidewalk, the winter air felt almost warm. Inside, Jason's world was breaking not in flames, but in the quiet vacuum of isolation. He would check his phone later and see calls unreturned. He would open his inbox and find meetings canceled. He would look into the mirror and for the first time see a man no longer protected by illusion. I didn't need to see the aftermath, but it came to me anyway. By morning, a temporary suspension was announced. Internal Affairs launched a full inquiry. His accounts were flagged. The company wiped his bio from the executive page. Chloe removed her last name from their business license. Jason called once. I let it ring, not out of anger, but finality. Some things don't need answers. Some doors don't need slamming. They just need to stay closed. Later that week, a man I hadn't heard from in years, the company's original founder, sent me a one-line message. "You did what we all should have. No applause, no parade. Just peace." Because the collapse of a kingdom built on lies isn't loud. It's quiet and permanent. There's a kind of silence that feels like punishment. And then there's this kind, the kind that feels like breathing for the first time in years. No more midnight calls asking for a small favor. No more family dinners turned into ego showcases. No more walking on eggshells in my own home, wondering if the next word would bruise what little was left. Now, the phone stays quiet. And it's beautiful. I wake up and make coffee without checking my account balance. I no longer pace the floor wondering what mess I'll have to clean up next, what lie I'll have to swallow to keep the peace. There is no peace in enabling, only exhaustion. Linda moves slower now, gentler. She doesn't defend him anymore. We don't speak of Jason often, but when we do, it's honest. Not angry, just real. The air in the house has changed. Lighter, cleaner, like someone opened a window and let the truth in. I don't know what Jason tells people now. Maybe he paints me as cruel, unforgiving. Maybe he pretends I never existed at all. But that's the thing about silence. It doesn't need defending. It just is. And mine? It's not revenge. It's freedom. It didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a single moment when the cord snapped. It had been fraying for years. But once I made the final cut, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Weightlessness. I called the last bank, told them to remove my name from anything remotely connected to Jason, closed the accounts, transferred the titles. I canceled the legal safety net I'd quietly kept in place, the one he never thanked me for, the one I prayed he'd never need. I scrubbed the co-signatures, dissolved the trust I'd created in his name, rewrote my will. For the first time, my signature belonged only to me. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because peace requires boundaries, and I had lived too long without any. The funny thing is, when you stop enabling someone, they don't come running back with apologies. They vanish. Jason didn't fight. He didn't beg. He just disappeared into silence. And maybe that's what he always wanted, the benefits of a father without the presence of one. So I gave him what he wanted. A clean break. No threads, no guilt, no noise. Just distance. And in that distance, I found something more permanent than revenge. Relief. There's this idea people love to repeat. Don't burn bridges, you might need to cross them again someday. But not all bridges lead somewhere worth returning to. The one between Jason and me wasn't a bridge. It was a toll road. I paved it. I maintained it. And he drove across it every time he needed to escape the consequences of his own choices. He never paid a fee. Never even waved. So I stopped maintaining it. And one day, I lit the match. There was no explosion, just a quiet collapse, timbers blackened, ropes snapped, and in its place, stillness. Friends asked if I regretted it, if I missed the chance to make things right. I told them the truth. I did make things right, for myself, because you can't force someone to value what you give, and you can't keep building towards someone who keeps moving the end of the road. The past still comes to visit sometimes, in dreams, in an old song on the radio, in the way Linda looks out the window a little longer than she used to. But even she knows the bridge is gone, and we're not rebuilding it. Some connections don't deserve repair. Some roads were only meant to be walked once, and some endings are final by design. My mornings are different now. There's no tension in my shoulders, no early calls, no scrambling to patch the latest crisis. The world outside still spins in chaos, but inside this house it's quiet, predictable, free. I wake up when the sun breaks through the blinds. I grind fresh coffee. I read the paper from front to back, not because I'm searching for anything, but because I finally have the time. There's no notification panic, no bank alerts, no cryptic voicemails. I tend to the backyard, replace light bulbs without urgency, fix the fence without metaphor. For the first time in years, everything I do is mine, not a cover, not a bailout, not a sacrifice made in secret. Sometimes Linda joins me outside. We sit. We don't speak much, but the silence feels earned. She doesn't ask about Jason anymore. She just touches my hand, like she's quietly thanking me for doing what she couldn't. Our world isn't glamorous. It's not some grand rebirth. It's just peaceful. And when you've lived in the storm for too long, peace doesn't feel small. It feels like a miracle. Linda doesn't cry anymore. There was a time when Jason could do no wrong in her eyes, when every misstep had a reason, every wound he caused came with a justification. He's tired. He's stressed. He didn't mean it. But after the video, after the audit, after the board's decision, she stopped saying his name. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't rage. It was something quieter, heavier, grief, not for the punishment he received, but for the man she thought he was. Now, she moves through the house with purpose. Fewer sighs, fewer apologies on his behalf. She's no longer bracing for the next call, the next excuse, the next request for money hidden behind a compliment. She's accepted it in her way. One evening, she took out a box of old family photos, Saturday at the kitchen table for hours. I didn't ask what she was doing. I just watched as she quietly removed the ones that hurt too much to look at. She didn't burn them, she didn't throw them away. She simply put them aside. That's what her silence means now. Not avoidance, not denial, just a quiet declaration. I see him, and I choose peace. I used to wonder if I had failed, if maybe I gave too much, too soon, if I blurred the lines between love and enabling, if, in trying to protect Jason from the world, I had shielded him from consequences too long. But those questions don't keep me up at night anymore. Because I finally realized something. You can pour every drop of yourself into someone, and they can still choose to stay empty. My reflection in the mirror isn't the same man who used to carry silent burdens in his spine and fake patience in his voice. He's older now, leaner, a little grayer, but lighter. He's not angry. He's not waiting for a call or a confession or an apology that'll never come. He's not interested in stories about who's saying what or where Jason landed next. He simply lives. There's strength in survival. There's wisdom in letting go. And there's peace in no longer explaining yourself to people who never wanted to understand you. I don't regret the love I gave. I just regret who I gave it to. But even that feels like closure now. Not because he earned it, but because I did. I walked past his name last week, printed on an old press release framed on the wall of the downtown lobby. No one stopped to read it. The gold had dulled. The photo beside it was crooked. I didn't straighten it. I kept walking, not out of spite, not out of pride, but because there was nothing left behind me worth turning around for. The bridge was gone, the books were closed, and the man I once called son was now just a chapter I had already finished reading. People think forgiveness is strength. Sometimes it is, but sometimes real strength is knowing you don't owe it, not when the harm was repeated. Not when the apologies never came, not when silence was your only reward for decades of sacrifice. I don't wish Jason harm. I don't hope for his downfall. I don't follow his career or scroll through the digital remains of his curated life. I simply don't care. And in that apathy, I found the one thing he could never give me. Peace without permission. I don't look back. I don't reach out. I don't flinch when someone says his name. He made his choices, and I made mine. Clean break. No return, no regrets. If this story gave you the justice you needed, give it a like and hit subscribe. The next one might hit even harder.